War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Volume 1, Part 1, Chapter 3. Anna Pavlovna's soiree was now in full swing. On all sides the spindles were humming away non-stop. Apart from the aunt and her sole companion, an elderly lady with a thin, careworn face, who seemed rather out of place in this brilliant society, the company had split into three groups. The one with the most men in it centered around the abbey. Another group, of younger people, was dominated by the beautiful Princess Helene, Prince Vasili's daughter, and the pretty little Princess Bolkonsky, with her blushing features and a figure too full for her young age. Mortemart and Anna Pavlovna formed part of the third group. The Viscount was a pleasant-looking young man, with gentle features and manners, obviously full of his own importance, but modest enough, because of his good breeding, to indulge any company that he might find himself in. Anna Pavlovna was clearly showing him off to her guests. Just as a skillful waiter can pass off as a supreme delicacy a cut of beef that would be inedible if you'd seen it in the filthy kitchen, Anna Pavlovna served up her guests that evening, first the Viscount and then the Abbé, as if they were supreme delicacies. In Mortemart's group, the conversation had turned to the execution of the Duke of Enghien. The Viscount held that the Duke had perished through his own magnanimity, and there were special reasons behind Bonaparte's animosity towards him. "Oh, I say, do tell us about it, Viscount," said Anna Pavlovna, delighted to feel she had insinuated a touch of Louis XV in the old-fashioned French phrase she had used. The Viscount gave a polite bow and a willing smile. Anna Pavlovna brought them into a circle around him and beckoned everyone over to hear his story. "The Viscount was a personal friend of the Duke," she whispered to one of them, and murmured to someone else, "The Viscount is such a good recanter." To a third person she said, "You see, what a man of quality." And the Viscount was presented in the most refined and advantageous light, served up like a joint of beef garnished with salad on a hot platter. The Viscount was preparing to launch forth. His smile was subtle. "My dear Helene, do come over here," said Anna Pavlovna to the gorgeous princess sitting in the very center of the other group a little way off. Princess Helene rose with a smile, the same unchanging beautiful woman's smile with which she had entered the room. With a gentle rustle of her white ball gown, trimmed with ivy and moss, with her glistening white shoulders, glossy hair, and sparkling diamonds, she moved between the men as they stepped aside to make way for her. Without looking anyone in the face, but beaming at the company in general, and apparently bestowing permission for everyone to admire her wonderful figure, her full shoulders, and her fashionably exposed bosom and back, she glided up to Anna Pavlovna, and the brilliance of the ballroom seemed to come with her. Helene was so exquisite that she not only avoided the slightest hint of flirtatiousness, she even seemed to be embarrassed by the all too evident, truly devastating beauty that was hers. It was as if she wanted to tone down the effect of her beauty, but couldn't do so. "What a beautiful woman," said everyone who saw her. The Viscount shrugged and looked down, as if transfixed by a mysterious force, as she arranged herself to sit before him, not sparing him the ever-dazzling smile. "Madam, I doubt my abilities in front of such an audience," he said, bowing with a smile. The princess rested her round, bare arm on a little table and found it unnecessary to say anything. She smiled, and she waited. Sitting up straight throughout the Viscount's story, she glanced down occasionally either at her beautiful round arm, so casually draped across the table, or at her still lovelier bosom and the diamond necklace above it that kept needing adjustment. Several times she also adjusted the folds of her gown, and whenever the narrative made a strong impact on the audience, she would glance across at Anna Pavlovna in order to imitate whatever expression she could see written on the maid of honor's face before resuming her radiant smile. The little Princess Bolkonsky had also moved away from the tea-table, following Helene. "Wait a minute, I must have my work," she said. "Come along, what are you thinking about?" she demanded of Prince Hippolyte. "Please fetch my bag." With a smile and a word for everyone, the little princess got the whole group to rearrange itself, and then sat down and settled her skirts. "Now I'm all right," she insisted, and took up her work, inviting the Viscount to begin. Prince Hippolyte brought her little bag, walked round behind her, moved up a chair, and sat down beside her. The charming Hippolyte bore a close resemblance to his beautiful sister. It was even more remarkable that in spite of the similarity, he was a very ugly man. His features were like his sister's, but whereas she glowed with joie de vivre, classical beauty, and the smiling self-assurance of youth, her brother's face was just the opposite, dim with imbecility, truculent and peevish, and his body was thin and feeble. His eyes, nose, and mouth, all his features seemed to twist themselves into a vague kind of obtuse snarl, while his arms and legs were always in an awkward tangle. "It's not a ghost story, is it?" he asked, settling down next to the princess and jerking his lorgnette up to his eyes, as if he needed this instrument before he could say anything. "Why, no, my dear fellow," said the astonished Viscount with a shrug. "It's just that I can't abide ghost stories," said Prince Hippolyte, his tone implying that he had blurted all this out before realizing what it meant. Because of the self-confidence with which he had spoken, no one could tell whether what he had said was very clever or very stupid. He was dressed in a dark green frock coat, stockings, light shoes, and knee breeches, of a color he referred to as the thigh of the startled nymph. The Viscount then gave a nice rendition of a story that was doing the rounds. Apparently, the Duke of Enghien had driven to Paris for a secret assignation with a young woman, Mademoiselle George, only to run into Bonaparte, who was also enjoying the favors of the same famous actress. On meeting the Duke, Napoleon had fallen into one of his fainting fits and had been completely at the Duke's mercy. The Duke had not taken advantage of this, but Bonaparte had later rewarded his magnanimity by having him put to death. This was a very charming and interesting story, especially the bit when the rivals recognized each other, and it seemed to excite the ladies. "Delightful," said Anna Pavlovna, with an inquiring glance at the little princess. "Delightful," whispered the little princess, stabbing her needle into her sewing to show that the interest and charm of the story were getting in the way of her work. With a grateful smile of appreciation at this silent tribute, the Viscount resumed his narrative, but Anna Pavlovna, who never took her eyes off the dreadful young man who was worrying her so much, could hear him holding forth with the Abbé too forcefully and too heatedly, so she sped across into the danger zone on a rescue mission. Sure enough, Pierre had managed to get into a political conversation with the Abbé about the balance of power, and the Abbé, evidently taken by the young man's naive passion, was expounding to him his cherished idea. Both men were listening too earnestly and talking too bluntly, and Anna Pavlovna didn't like it. "You do it by means of the balance of power in Europe and the rights of the people," the Abbé was saying. "If one powerful state like Russia, despite its reputation for barbarity, were to take a disinterested stand as the head of an alliance aimed at guaranteeing the balance of power in Europe, it would save the world." "But how are you going to get such a balance of power?" Pierre was gathering himself to say, but at that moment Anna Pavlovna came across, glowered at Pierre, and asked the Italian how he was surviving the local climate. His face changed instantly, and assumed the sickly sweet, patronizing air which he obviously reserved for conversations with women. "I am so enchanted by the delightful wit and culture of the society people, especially the ladies, by whom I have had the good fortune to be received, that I have not yet had time to think about the climate," he said, determined not to let go of the Abbé and Pierre. Anna Pavlovna steered them into the larger group, where it would be easier to keep an eye on them. At this point in walked another guest, the young Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, husband of the little princess. He was quite short, but a very handsome young man, with sharp, clean-cut features. Everything about him, from his languid, bored expression to his slow and steady stride, stood in stark contrast to his vivacious little wife. He made it obvious that he knew everybody in the room, and was so fed up with the whole lot that just looking at them and listening to them drove him to distraction. And of all the wearisome faces, it was the face of his own pretty wife that seemed to bore him most. With a snarl distorting his handsome face, he turned away from her. He kissed Anna Pavlovna's hand, screwed up his eyes, and scanned the whole company. "Are you enlisting for the war, Prince?" said Anna Pavlovna. "General Kutuzov has been kind enough to want me as his aide," said Bolkonsky, saying Kutuzov like a Frenchman, rather than Kutuzov. And what about Lise, your wife? She's going into the country. Shame on you, depriving us of your charming wife. Andrei, said his wife, addressing her husband in the flirtatious tone that she normally reserved for other men. The Viscount has just told us a wonderful story about Mademoiselle George and Bonaparte. Prince Andrei scowled and turned away. Pierre had been looking at this man with a joyful, affectionate gaze since the moment he walked in. And now he went over and took him by the arm. Before looking round, Prince Andrei gave a pained look of irritation as he felt the touch. But the moment he saw Pierre's smiling face, he smiled back in an unusually sweet and pleasant way. It's you? Out in society? He said to Pierre. I knew you'd be here, answered Pierre. I'm coming to dine with you. He added in a low voice, so as not to interrupt the Viscount, who was going on with his story. Is that all right? Of course it isn't, laughed Prince Andrei, but his handshake told Pierre he had no need to ask. He was about to go on, but at that moment Prince Vasily and his daughter stood up, and the two young men rose to let them go by. Do excuse me, my dear Viscount, said Prince Vasily to the Frenchman, gently tugging down on his sleeve to persuade him not to get up. This confounded reception at the ambassador's deprives me of the pleasure and interrupts you. I am so sorry to leave your delightful party, he said to Anna Pavlovna. Delicately holding on to the folds of her gown, his daughter, Princess Helene, moved off between the chairs, and the smile on her gorgeous face was more radiant than ever. Pierre watched this vision of beauty go past, his eyes brimming with rapture, and something not far from terror. Isn't she lovely? Said Prince Andrei. Yes, she is, said Pierre. As he went past, Prince Vasily took Pierre by the arm and turned to Anna Pavlovna. Can you please train this bear for me? He said. He's been staying with me for a month, and this is the first time I've seen him out in society. There's nothing more important for a young man than the company of intelligent women.